Hello, hello. So for this video, I'm going to explain how to calculate a correlation by hand. So you'll be doing this for your first task for the lab for week 5. So you see this kind of looks like our standard deviation task where I have some numbers here for you. And these are the numbers that we're going to correlate. Now, these other values are coming from your book. So sometimes when I ask you to do things by hand, there is an explanation of how to do this in your book. So if you're confused, feel free to check this as a resource. There's a really nice handy explanation for this. But I'll go over some of this with you now in this video to help. So the first thing that we are going to do to basically, let me back up. When we're calculating a correlation by hand, we're essentially trying to figure out these different values in this formula. And it's a little confusing, but when you start to break it down, it becomes a little less complex. So the trick with doing this sort of thing is to take it bit by bit, and it'll seem less daunting. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So in our example, I have some other numbers that we're going to correlate. This will be pretty much exactly what you do for your lab, but I'm using different numbers than with your lab. And then we're going to go through the table like you see in your lab. And when we're filling out these numbers in the table, we're essentially trying to get values for these different components of that formula for a correlation. And then these values are from that example from your book. They're not from this example. So the first thing that we're going to do is square our x value. And to do that, we'll type in equal, we'll hit our cell over there and do a caret and 2. So that says to square that value. Now, maybe you'll remember from the standard deviation example that I have, if you have essentially the same formula, but just one cell over or one cell under, you can just drag it and it'll do the exact same thing. So because I wanted to also square this y value, I moved over this cell with my little crosshairs, and it's doing the same thing, just one cell over. If you don't like that, you can always just do it by hand. It does the exact same thing. Now, I do recommend if you're doing the same formula for a lot of values in the same row, just dragging instead of doing it over and over again by hand. It'll be so much easier. So again, we just see that same formula just going down the line. And we'll do the same thing for y squared. Now all these are we're prepping ourselves for this value, for instance, and that value. So we're just setting ourselves up here. Now the next step that we need to do is multiply x times y. So we'll be multiplying just regular x naught x squared by regular y. And here we can see we're setting ourselves up for this formula here. Okay, so we multiplied x by y. We're going to drag it down. We got an extra one. Okay, now this backwards looking e thing. We talked about this for the standard deviation portion of our class. This is saying to sum whatever comes after. And because we have multiple values of x and we have multiple values of y, that's what we're summing. We're summing the cross product of x times y for each of our people in our data set, our participants. This could be survey items where people answer a Likert scale for for X, you know, how, with our running example, how extroverted you are and how maybe agreeable you are as two personality characteristics, whatever these variables are, we're essentially going to be summing the cross product for this first value. And then we're summing all our X's and we're summing all our Y's. So we're basically going to be summing all of these different values in slightly different ways. So to do our next step, we're just going to sum all of these rows. So in order to sum, you'll just do equal, type in sum, parentheses, and then you can just drag it down. I'll show you that again. Just do equals sum, parentheses, and then select the numbers that you want to sum. Close parentheses. Okay, so the sum of X, which will be useful for this and for this, is 51. Nifty trick, we can just drag this on over and we get the sum for all of these columns. So the sum, you can always check too by double clicking. The sum for Y, it's here, it's 57, X squared, Y squared, and then the cross product of X times Y. Okay, so now I have these numbers down here. And these are going to be for these different, they're corresponding to these different boxes that are also numbered. So we're going to do a little bit of math here to figure out the values for each of these different boxes. And then we're going to plug these values in to figure out the correlation. Okay, so to figure out the value for box 1, we need to get this figure that's the sum of the cross product of X and Y. So we have that right there. And we're going to multiply it by our sample size. And we can figure out our sample size by seeing how many people, how many rows we have, and each row is a respondent. So in this example, we have 16 people. So we'll do equals, our n is 16, and we're just going to multiply that by X times Y. So that's our value for 1. Now we're not going to worry about minusing the value for 2 yet. We're just getting these values separately. So for 2, we're going to multiply the sum of our X values times the sum of our Y values. So we already have that up here, so nifty. We're going to take our sum of our X values, star for multiply, and our sum of our Y values. Okay, so for box 3, now we're multiplying the sample size by the sum of the squared X's. So our sample size is the same, 16 times the sum of our squared X's. So that's this column here. And for 4, it's a little different. Here, we're going to take this sum of our X values and then square it. So it's different from this value, which is the square, like we squared X and then we summed it. Now, for 4, we summed it and then we're going to square it. So to do number 4, we hit equals, then we click on our X value, and we square it. Okay, now for 5, this looks a lot like what we did for number 3. We're just doing it on Y now. So our sample size is 16, multiply by the sum of the squared Y's. Right, so we have our Y squared summed and then multiplied by 16. And then lastly, we're going to take the sum of y and then we're going to square it. Okay, so we have our main figures here. Now we can just start joining them together. So I thought it would be easiest to just break down this formula again, just at like a more abstract level. So now we're going to just figure out the numerator, and then we'll figure out the denominator below. So for the numerator, we need to take our value from box 1 and subtract box 2. So I'm going to hit equals. We have box 1, subtract box 2. Okay, now the numerator is a little more, or the denominator is a little more tricky because we're going to have to square everything in the end. So I'm going to break it down again, and I'm going to first just subtract, take 3 and subtract 4. So here, let's do 3 minus 4. Three minus 4. Okay. Now I'm going to do 5 minus 6. Five minus 6. So that's giving us this value here. Then we can multiply these two values, right? Because that's ultimately what we're doing. We're going to multiply this when we subtract 3 from 4. Then we're going to multiply that value, which is 295 in our case, from this whole value, which is 159. So multiply some big ugly number and then square root. And you remember that's how we, SQRT is square root. Then we can just plop in our number, close parentheses. And I'm going to copy it up here. And when you copy, be sure if you just paste it, it'll give you, oh, actually, seem not to mind. Why didn't it? Oh yeah, it took the square root of the wrong number. You want it to take the square root of this value, and it moved it up because I copied it. So that's not giving you the right, oops, that's not giving you the right number. You need to, when you copy, paste special, and just do value, and that'll give you the same number. Instead of pasting the formula, you're pasting the value. It's a really important step, because otherwise you'll get the wrong number. Okay. And so then, just to take the correlation, we're going to simply divide our numerator by our denominator. And then we see the correlation between x and y is 0.39 and some change. Now remember, for APA, we're always going to round to the second decimal point. So how we would write this up is, it would be, let's look, 0.39, and then we look to the next one to see if we need to round up or round down, and it's a 2, so we don't need to round up. We'll just keep it the way it is. So the correlation is 0.39. And so if you have any questions on that, that's a lot of information, but if you break it down, it'll be a little bit easier for you. And then also, if you get stuck, feel free to talk to me, reach out, read your book. Any of those things should be helpful. You should have the materials that you need, but I'm definitely here as a resource for you to talk through stuff. Okay, so good luck. And again, come reach out to me if you have any questions.